galaxy had long whispered of Princess Xalara, the ruler of the Xirians, a species so ancient and powerful that they were thought to be the creators of the stars themselves. For centuries, the Xirians had held dominion over countless worlds, their technology far beyond anything the universe had ever seen. It was said that they had once shaped the very fabric of space-time, bending the laws of physics to their will. But what terrified the galaxy the most was the legend surrounding Xalara. She was known for one thing above all else: her face remained hidden. It was a custom that no one dared question. In all the holo reports, images, and broadcasts, her face was obscured by a veil of deep, shimmering darkness, a mysterious energy that no one could pierce. The stories told of those who had ventured too close to her and were driven mad. There were rumors that her gaze alone could fracture the mind, ripping apart the very fabric of reality. Something she learned was hard for her to include in her writings and her books. The few who had dared to come close enough to see her face, whether by accident or defiance, were said to have been swallowed by the universe itself, their screams echoing into the void. Yet, despite the terror that surrounded her, Princess Xalara was not a cruel monarch. She ruled with an iron fist, yes, but also with wisdom and compassion. She had maintained a delicate balance of peace across the galaxy, keeping the warring factions at bay, preventing the most terrible of conflicts from spiraling into annihilation. The Xirians were a proud race, and their rule was one of absolute control, but Xalara herself seemed to understand the fine line between maintaining order and suffocating freedom. Under her reign, the galaxy had flourished, but the cost of her power was a secret buried in the deepest chambers of her heart. For decades, the galaxy had lived in fear of her unseen visage, a force so immense that it bent the very will of the stars. There were whispers that she had hidden herself behind the veil, not out of vanity or pride, but because of the incredible danger her face represented. It was said that those who looked upon her true form would understand a power so vast that their minds would shatter under its weight. There were stories of ancient seers, beings who could peer into the deepest mysteries of the universe, who had tried to glimpse her face and had disappeared without a trace, their fates becoming the stuff of nightmares. But there was more. Some believed that Xalara's face held the key to an even greater power, one that could reshape the galaxy, if it were ever unleashed. The Xirians kept their queen's true nature a closely guarded secret, and any who questioned the veil were met with swift and unforgiving punishment. The very thought of revealing her face was forbidden. And so, for a time, the galaxy lived in fearful peace, with Xalara's name spoken only in hushed tones, reverence mixed with dread. But everything changed when a lone human, a mercenary named Captain Arik Vale, stumbled across a hidden artifact on the barren world of Urvessa. A relic thought to be a mere myth, Arik Vale was no hero. He was a soldier, a mercenary who had spent most of his life scraping by on the fringes of the galaxy. The human species, with its relative youth and primitive technologies, had always been an afterthought in the grand scheme of galactic politics. They were rarely involved in the affairs of the more powerful races, and when they were, it was usually as pawns in the games of the elites. Arik was used to being overlooked. He was used to being dismissed as insignificant, just another face in the crowd. But all of that changed when he found himself on Urvessa, a world that was little more than a forgotten ruin in the Xirian Empire. It was a place where the ancient past still clung to the surface like the dust of a long-dead star, and it was here that Arik's path would cross with the unimaginable. Arik's path would cross with the unimaginable and the zealot's self in the star. Arik had been hired by a mysterious client to recover a particular artifact, a Xirian relic that had been lost to time. No one had any real idea of its purpose, but the client had made it clear that Arik's life would depend on retrieving it. The job was straightforward enough: locate the relic and deliver it. Easy money. or so he thought. Eric began. The ruins on Ervesa were silent and oppressive. The air was thick with the weight of forgotten histories, and as Eric and his crew ventured deeper into the deserted facility, it felt as though the planet itself were holding its breath. The Xerians had abandoned this place long ago, leaving behind only fractured memories and half-destroyed technology. Still, there were signs of something that Eric couldn't quite place. They found the artifact buried beneath a collapsed section of the facility's walls, a small cylindrical object that pulsed with an eerie, faint glow. It was unlike anything Eric had ever seen, its surface etched with intricate symbols that seemed to shift before his eyes. At first, his crew thought it was some sort of advanced weapon or a piece of long-lost technology. But when Eric laid his hands on it, something strange happened. The hum filled the air, deep and resonant, as if the artifact itself were alive. Eric felt a pull in his chest, a magnetic force drawing him toward the relic as if it were calling him. He couldn't resist. Something in him compelled him to activate the device, to turn the key that had been hidden for millennia. The moment he did, everything around him changed. The world around him blurred, fading into nothingness. The air grew thick, heavy with an indescribable energy, and for a brief moment it felt as though time itself had stopped. Then the darkness consumed him. He was no longer standing in the ruins of Ervesa. Instead, he found himself in an infinite void, a vast and empty space that stretched out endlessly in every direction. It was as though he were floating in the heart of the universe itself, suspended between the stars. And then she appeared. At the center of the void stood a figure, tall and regal, shrouded in a cloak of darkness. The figure turned toward him, and Eric's breath caught in his throat. It was Princess Xalara. Her face was hidden beneath a veil of deep, shimmering light, a kind of energy that radiated with a force beyond comprehension. It was a presence that filled the space around them, so powerful that Eric could feel it pressing against his very soul. His mind swirled, and for a moment he thought he might lose himself to the overwhelming force. But he didn't. Somehow he remained grounded, his thoughts still intact. Xalara spoke, her voice a soft, resonant echo in his mind. "You are the first, human, to gaze upon my face without succumbing to madness. Why do you not tremble?" Eric felt the weight of her question, the gravity of her presence pressing down on him. He knew what she was asking. Why wasn't he afraid? Why hadn't his mind shattered like so many others who had dared to get too close? The truth was, he didn't know. He had no answers. All he knew was that despite the terrifying power she exuded, he didn't feel the fear that everyone had warned him about. There was something in her, something human, that called to him. "I don't know," Eric said, his voice trembling slightly, but not from fear. "But I'm not afraid." Xalara regarded him in silence, and for a long moment, Eric thought she might say something else, but she didn't. Instead, the void began to shift, and the overwhelming energy that had surrounded him slowly receded. "You are the first," she repeated, her voice tinged with something akin to wonder. "The first to understand. Perhaps there is more to you than the others." Before he could respond, the vision collapsed, and Eric found himself back on Ervesa, standing in the exact spot where he had activated the artifact. The ruins around him seemed unchanged, but his mind was not. It was as though the universe itself had bent and reshaped around him, leaving him with a new understanding of something far greater than himself. Was he doing it right? It seemed an exceedingly risky exercise, but when he did the workout successfully with his mask, it was blissful. But the vision had not been an illusion. It had been real. Princess Xalara was real, and whatever it was about her that had made the galaxy fear her had now become a part of him. He knew that he had to find her again, to understand what it was that lay behind her hidden face. For days, Arik struggled to make sense of what he had experienced. His crew had vanished, and the artifact had disappeared with them. There was no sign of it anywhere, and the more Arik searched, the more he felt as though the galaxy itself was trying to erase his encounter. It was as though the universe wanted to bury the truth of Princess Xalara's face, to keep it locked away where no one could reach it. But Arik couldn't forget. He had seen her, felt her power, and he knew now that Xalara was not the monster the galaxy made her out to be. She was a prisoner. The veil that hid her face wasn't just a symbol of power, it was a prison, one she had placed around herself to protect the galaxy from the destructive force that lay within her. The power she held was not inherently evil, but it was uncontrollable, and for reasons Arik didn't yet understand, she had chosen to imprison herself to ensure that no one else would ever have to face it. But Arik had seen beyond the veil, and in that moment he knew that he was different from the others. He didn't fear her. He saw her as a person, a ruler trapped by her own power. And for the first time in history, someone had broken the rules of the galaxy. He had broken through the veil. Now he had a choice to make. He could walk away and forget what he had seen, or he could go to the heart of the Xirian Empire and try to find a way to speak to Princess Xalara again. But this time he would do it on his own terms. He would not be afraid of her. He would offer her a chance to break free. He would break all the rules, and in doing so he would change the course of history forever. Arik Vale was not a hero. He wasn't even sure he was someone to be remembered. Born on a planet that hadn't yet made its mark on the greater galactic stage, he had always felt like an outsider, watching from the periphery as the universe moved at a pace he could barely comprehend. As a mercenary, he had done things he wasn't proud of, accepted jobs that others might deem too dangerous or too morally gray. In his line of work, it was easier not to question the nature of the things he did. The money was the only thing that mattered. That and staying alive long enough to get to the next paycheck. Still, but something had changed after Ervesa. The job had started like any other. He had taken on the task of retrieving a Xirian artifact. A simple job, really. The galaxy's ancient empires had long left behind their relics and technology, and Arik had never been one to question the odd jobs that fell in his lap. The Xirians were legends, their culture and technology lost to time. All he had to do was get in, grab the artifact, and get out. But then came the artifact itself. It was an object unlike anything Arik had ever seen. It hummed with energy that seemed to resonate deep within his chest. The moment he touched it, reality bent around him. Time seemed to stretch and collapse all at once. One moment he was standing in the crumbling ruins of Ervesa. The next, he was floating in an endless void, suspended in a space where nothing made sense. In that void, he saw Princess Xalara, the enigmatic ruler of the Xirians. He had seen her in the stories, her face hidden behind a veil of dark energy, her presence a force so overwhelming that anyone who came too close was driven mad or vanished without a trace. But here, in the vast emptiness, he stood before her, and he felt no fear, no madness. He simply felt connected. The very universe seemed to quiet as she spoke to him, her voice not heard through his ears, but through his mind. "You are the first," she said, her voice carrying the weight of centuries. "The first to gaze upon my face without being consumed by madness." "Why?" Arik had no answer. The legends had spoken of how those who looked upon her true face were never seen again. They spoke of those whose minds fractured, who were never the same after glimpsing the being that stood before him. And yet in that moment, Arik didn't feel terror. He felt a strange calmness, an understanding. There was something in her, something deep and ancient, that reached out to him, not as a monster, but as a prisoner. He saw in her not a god or a tyrant, but someone trapped, someone desperate for freedom. "I don't know," Eric said, his voice trembling with the weight of the moment, "but I'm not afraid." Xalara had studied him then, her gaze intense, yet not unkind. For a long while she didn't speak, as if contemplating him, weighing his words. Then she simply said, "Perhaps you are different." Ah. And with that, the vision ended. He was back on Urvessa, standing alone among the ruins, the artifact gone, and his crew vanished without a trace. The world had shifted around him, and Eric felt something irrevocable change within himself. He had seen the truth, or at least a fragment of it. Princess Xalara was not the tyrant the galaxy made her out to be. She wasn't the monster the legends warned about. Weapon-ready depression, she was a prisoner, trapped behind the veil of her own power. But now, Arik knew something others did not. He had looked beyond the veil. He had stood before her and felt her pain, her longing. She had been hiding not because she wanted to rule the galaxy with an iron fist, but because the power she held within her was too dangerous to unleash. It was a power that could destroy everything. Eric felt a burning need to find her again. The encounter had opened something within him, something he could not ignore. He needed to break the rules, to defy the galaxy's understanding of Xalara's power. He had been given a glimpse of her truth, and he could not walk away from it. There was more to her than the legends said, more to her than anyone had dared to imagine. In the days following the encounter, Arik searched the galaxy for any trace of Princess Xalara. But the more he looked, the more he realized that the universe had done its best to bury the truth. Her presence, her true nature, had been carefully hidden, and the forces that sought to keep it that way were powerful, much more powerful than Arik had anticipated. The Xirians had spent centuries building their empire, and with that empire came immense security. The princess's true identity, her face, had been a closely guarded secret, and the galaxy had been taught to fear it. Any attempt to uncover it had been swiftly and violently suppressed. Those who dared to search for the truth were never seen again. The veil that obscured Xalara's face was not just a symbol of her dominance, it was a lock, a prison designed to keep her power contained, and no one, not even the mighty Xirians themselves, had ever dared question it. But Arik had seen beyond it, and now, with that knowledge burning in his mind, he knew what he had to do. He had to find her again. He had to break the chains that bound her to her role as a hidden ruler, to free her from the prison of her own making. It was a dangerous proposition. The Xirians would never allow it. The galaxy would never allow it. But Arik wasn't the kind of man who followed rules. He had broken them all his life, and he wasn't about to stop now. The door swung open, and Arik experienced a thrill of joy until he realized what was in the galaxy instead. He gathered a crew of like-minded individuals, disillusioned, rebellious types, who had their own reasons for defying the status quo. Together they would make their way to the heart of the Xirian Empire. It was a journey that would take them into the very belly of the beast, to the center of a civilization that had thrived for millennia on secrecy and fear. The journey was long, fraught with danger at every turn. The closer they got to the heart of the empire, the more Arik felt the weight of what he was doing. He was not just defying the Xirians, he was defying the very fabric of the galaxy. He was challenging the rules that had governed the stars for eons. It was a fool's errand, he knew that. But he couldn't help it. He had seen Xalara, and he knew that she was not the villain the galaxy believed her to be. She was more than that. And in his heart, Arik believed that if he could reach her, if he could help her, she would be able to change everything. When they finally arrived on the capital world of the Xirian Empire, The sheer scale of the civilization was overwhelming. The city stretched out before them, an intricate web of spires and colossal structures that seemed to touch the sky itself. The air was heavy with the hum of advanced technology, and the streets were lined with beings of every race imaginable. But despite the grandeur, there was an oppressive sense of control, a suffocating atmosphere that told Eric everything he needed to know. The Xyrians ruled with an iron grip, and there was no room for dissent. Reverend Eric and his crew moved carefully, keeping to the shadows and avoiding the watchful eyes of the Xyrian enforcers. They knew that one wrong move could end it all. The Xyrians were not known for their mercy, and anyone caught attempting to disrupt the order of the Empire would be erased without hesitation. Or would it not? His eyes floated across the screen, and his thoughts quickened. But Arik pressed on. He had come too far to turn back now. He had a plan, a way to breach the heart of the Empire and reach Xalara. But it wouldn't be easy. The deeper they traveled into the Xyrian capital, the more Arik felt the weight of his actions. He was about to do something that could change the galaxy forever, and he wasn't sure if he was ready for the consequences. You bought the palace at the cost of the gas. Still, he pushed forward. They would infiltrate the palace, find a way to reach Xalara, and break through the veil that had kept her hidden for so long. Arik had no idea what would happen once they did. Would she accept his help? Or would the power within her prove too great for even him to understand? As they entered the palace grounds, Arik couldn't help but feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. The universe had taught him to fear the unknown, to follow the rules and never question the powers that be. But now, standing at the precipice of something far greater than himself, Arik knew that he had no choice but to break the rules, to defy the galaxy itself. For if he succeeded, he would not only free Princess Xalara, he would set in motion a chain of events that could change the fate of the entire universe. Xalara ran through her memories of the last time she had exercised. She was pretty sure she had played in a waterfall spring about half a year ago, but there was little in the records to support that. And as they approached the entrance to the inner sanctum, Arik knew that the galaxy would never be the same again. The galaxy had long whispered of Princess Xalara, the ruler of the Xyrians, a species so ancient and powerful that their influence stretched across vast star systems. It was said that they had once controlled the ebb and flow of entire galaxies, manipulating cosmic forces with ease. Their technology was so advanced that it bordered on the divine, and their dominion over countless worlds was absolute. But the most terrifying aspect of their rule was not their power, but the enigma of Princess Xalara herself. She had ruled for centuries, her name uttered in awe and fear across the stars. Her face, however, remained hidden behind an impenetrable veil of darkness, a mysterious energy field that no one could breach. It was not just a veil in the conventional sense. It was a barrier that shielded her from the rest of the universe, a force that seemed to warp reality itself. There were many who believed that to look upon her true face was to gaze into the very heart of the universe, and that such an act would drive anyone to madness. The few who claimed to have seen her face, whether by accident or defiance, had vanished without a trace, their minds shattered by the sheer force of her presence. The stories surrounding her face had become the stuff of legend, an eternal mystery that filled the galaxy with both fear and fascination. Yet, for all the terror she inspired, Princess Xalara was no tyrant. Her rule was one of strange balance, an equilibrium that prevented the galaxy from descending into chaos. The Xyrians, while fearsome and godlike in their abilities, governed with an unspoken code of restraint. The galaxy's many factions, from the warlike Kaldorians to the philosophical Santuvians, all understood that while Xalara's power could annihilate them, she chose not to. The peace that reigned under her watch was fragile, delicate, but it endured because of her mysterious rule. It was this mystery that had kept the galaxy in a state of uneasy peace for so long. The veil that obscured her face was not just a symbol of her power, it was a warning that any attempt to reveal the true nature of the Xirian princess would bring about consequences no one was prepared for. No one, that is, except one human. A mercenary named Captain Arik Vale. Arik was no hero. He wasn't even a particularly remarkable soldier. He was a mercenary, a drifter who spent most of his life taking on menial jobs in the far reaches of the galaxy. The human race was still young, still struggling to find its place among the stars, and Arik had long accepted that they would never be more than a footnote in the grand history of the universe. The human species had its moments of brilliance, yes, but they were rarely involved in the affairs of the greater powers. They were seen as insignificant, a species not yet deserving of a seat at the table of the galaxy's elites. So when Arik found himself on the arid world of Ervesa, he thought little of it. It was a backwater planet, a forgotten ruin where ancient Xirian technology lay dormant beneath the surface. He had been hired by a mysterious client to retrieve a Xirian artifact, a relic of unknown origin that was rumored to hold immense power. His crew had landed on the desolate planet, and they began their search for the artifact amidst the ruins of an ancient Xirian research facility. It seemed like a simple job, one that Arik had taken purely for the pay. But as they dug deeper into the ruins, they uncovered something far beyond their understanding. The tribesmen were careful to reveal nothing to the outside world. The treasures of the temple had been destroyed. All that remained were bones. The artifact they found was unlike anything Arik had ever seen. It was a small cylindrical device, pulsating with an eerie light. It seemed to hum with an energy that was both alien and familiar. Arik's crew had no idea what it was, but they could sense its significance. No one had ever seen anything like it before. The moment Arik laid his hands on the artifact, the air around them seemed to grow thick with an unseen pressure. Everyone agreed. The energy within the device surged, and suddenly the world around him began to warp and distort. The ruins of Ervesa faded into nothingness, and Arik found himself standing in an infinite void. His skin felt thin, as if an outer layer of skin had been removed. He hobbled towards the line of vessels. The air was heavy, charged with a force that seemed to press in on him from all sides. It was as though he had been pulled from the physical world and placed into the very fabric of the cosmos. His body was weightless, floating in the vast emptiness. And then he saw her, Princess Xalara. At the center of the void stood a figure, her form indistinct but undeniably regal. Her face was obscured by the same veil of shimmering energy that had always been associated with her. It was a force that rippled with an overwhelming power, a power that threatened to crush him with its very presence. But despite the sheer force of her aura, Arik didn't feel fear. He didn't feel the overwhelming madness that had claimed others before him. Instead, he felt a strange calmness, a connection that he couldn't explain. Xalara spoke to him, her voice a soft, ethereal echo in his mind. "You are the first," she said, "the first to gaze upon my face without being consumed by madness. Why?" Arik was stunned. He had heard the legends, the stories of those who had tried and failed to look upon the princess's face. And yet, here he was, standing before her in this strange realm, and he was not afraid. There was no madness, no twisting of reality. For the first time in his life, he felt as though he understood something that no one else did, something that no one else could possibly comprehend. "I don't know," he said, his voice trembling slightly but not from fear. "But I'm not afraid." "Come on," said she. Xalara studied him in silence. Her gaze was powerful, yet not unkind. "Perhaps there is more to you than I thought. Perhaps you are not like the others." The void around them seemed to shift, as if acknowledging the truth in her words. The energy that had surrounded Arik began to fade, and with it the vision began to dissolve. But as it did, Xalara's presence lingered in his mind, a constant reminder that he had seen something few could even imagine. He had glimpsed the face of the most powerful being in the galaxy, and had not been destroyed by it. When Arik opened his eyes again, he was back in the ruins of Eressa. His crew had vanished, and the artifact was gone. It was as though the entire encounter had never happened. The world around him seemed unchanged, but he knew that he was different. He had felt the power of Xalara, the force that lay hidden behind the veil, and he knew that he couldn't walk away from this. He had seen something that the galaxy had never been allowed to witness. But there was a problem. Xalara had been a prisoner of her own power. The veil that obscured her face was not a mere symbol of her dominance. It was a cage. The force that she contained within herself was so immense that it threatened to tear the fabric of the galaxy apart. She had placed the veil over herself to protect the universe from the power within her, but Arik had seen through it. For a brief moment he had understood her, and he knew that she wasn't the monster the galaxy feared. She was trapped, bound by her own strength. Arik knew that he had to find her again. He had to break the rules that had been written into the very fabric of the galaxy's history. The veil had kept Xalara's true nature hidden for so long, but now he had seen beyond it. He couldn't allow her to remain in her prison, to remain a godlike figure who was bound by her own power. She deserved to be free, to choose her own path, to break free of the chains that had been placed upon her by her people. And so Arik made a decision. He would go to the heart of the Xirian Empire. He would seek out Princess Xalara and offer her something that no one had ever given her before. A choice. The galaxy had lived in fear of her for centuries, but Arik believed that there was more to her than the legends said. She was not a monster. She was not a god. She was a person who had been trapped by her own power. The journey ahead would not be easy. The Xirians were a formidable race, and their empire was vast and heavily guarded. But Arik had no other choice. He had seen the truth, and he could not ignore it. He would break all the rules, defy all the expectations of the galaxy, and find a way to free Princess Xalara from her prison. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing for certain: the galaxy would never be the same again. Arik Vale, a simple human mercenary, had broken through the veil, and in doing so, he had altered the fate of the universe forever.